Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's talk on skill development in positive language learning and teaching techniques and guidelines. My name is Maki Amiri, and I'm one of the co-coordinators of the research method SIG within IAPO. We have an incredible team, and I'm pleased to introduce them. Of course, Bianca, our coordinator, and my fellow co-coordinators, Giuseppe and Alfaf. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Hassan Khajavy, who is a renowned expert in the field of psychology of language learning and teaching. He's postdoctoral researcher at the University of Graz, Austria. His research focuses on the psychology of language learning and teaching in structured second language acquisition and research methodology. His recent work focuses on developing scales to measure emotional experiences in language classrooms. He has published in leading second language acquisition and educational journals, including TESOL Quarterly, Language Learning Studies in Second Language Acquisition, and Language Teaching Research. Well, before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this session is being recorded, as I've mentioned, and the recording will be posted on our SIG YouTube channel for those who may want to revisit the discussion or share it with colleagues. The talk will be 45 to 50 minutes, followed by 15 Q&A session, uh, which will be, of course, an opportunity to engage with our distinguished speaker, Dr. Hassan. So please welcome Dr. Hassan, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mackie. Hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. First of all, I would like to thank Giuseppe and Mackie for organizing this talk, and it's a pleasure for me to be with all these great scholars in our field today. And I hope we have enough time also for discussion and Q&A, but I try to just start as soon as possible. So the topics that I will cover in my today's talk will be a short introduction to questionnaires, steps for developing and validating a questionnaire, rules for writing good items, and of course, Q&A at the end of the talk. So what is a questionnaire? A questionnaire refers to a set of questions to gather data from participants, and questionnaires are the main data collection method in service. So they are more common than, let's say, interviews or, I don't know, observations or all other data gathering methods. And there are some advantages of using questionnaires, such as gathering a large amount of information quickly and from a large sample. We can use questionnaires with different people in a variety of situations and locations. This might not be possible with like other data gathering tools. And of course, another important advantage of using questionnaires is that the anonymity of the data and the participants. So all these things make questionnaires very interesting as a data gathering tool. Now, what kind of data we can measure with questionnaires? We can measure factual information such as age, gender, marital status. We can measure behavioral questions, for example, about habits and lifestyle of people. And the most important thing about questionnaires is that we can measure attitudinal questions. For example, participants' attitudes, beliefs, and values. And this is what we usually do in the field of psychology of language learning and teaching. Okay, so for the rest of my presentation, my talk, uh, I'm gonna focus on some guidelines for developing questionnaires and validating questionnaires. There are really many great sources that we can use, but these sources are the ones that I used, and actually I tried to find like I couldn't say the best ones, but the ones that I thought might be more relevant to our field and our discussion today. So these are the main sources, and they are all from the other fields, for example, from I don't know, general education or maybe medical education. But I thought all of them can be relevant to our field of study. And of course, I also included three important sources for questionnaire development from our own field. I think you are familiar with these sources. So the first two sources on the left, Zoltan Dornier's books, Research Methods in Applied Linguistics. A few chapters of this book have been devoted to questionnaire development. And there is another book which is specifically written for questionnaire development, the one in the middle, Questionnaires in Second Language Research. Actually, there are three editions of this book. And this one is the third edition that Dorney co-authored with Jean-Marc Deval, two leading researchers in our field. Actually, we unfortunately lost Zoltan, but yeah, this is a great book that you can use for question development. And I also found a recent paper from Teimuri, Sudina, and Plonsky that I thought this one is also very uh, interesting paper that can inform best practices for questionnaire development and validation. So these are all great sources that I use for my today's talk. But again, I want to emphasize that there are many more other sources that we can use. Okay. So for scale development, based on all these articles and books that I read, I came up with these 6 steps. So a questionnaire development starts with construct identification, then item generation, checking content validity, cognitive interviewing, pilot testing, and the last one, main administration. Okay, so let's start with the first step, which is construct identification. The first step for conducting or actually validating and developing a questionnaire is to define our scales. For example, if we want to develop a scale which measures anxiety, or let's say L2 anxiety, the first thing is that what L2 anxiety means. So it's somehow related to an operational definition of our constructs. Now, the next point is that how should we define a construct? What is the best way that we can come up with an acceptable definition of a construct? The best thing we can do is to refer to the literature. So we can read what theoretical frameworks are there, what previous research, empirical research has been done, and based on these theoretical frameworks and previous empirical research, we can define our scale. And the good thing about review of the literature is that we can also see if there are any other scales that already measure our constructs. Now, this definition is also something that has been addressed as a kind of validity, which is not very common. So we might have heard content validity, construct validity, predictive validity, but we also have something called definitional validity, which means there should be a clear definition of our construct. So a clear, precise, and adequate definition of the constructs that we should measure. And this is the very first step in scale development. So definitional validity. Now, so we have defined our scales, or not the scale actually, our construct and dimensions of our construct. The next step is item generation, which is a very important step. How can we generate items and come up with an item pool? There are generally two main methods. The first one is called a deductive method. So it's somehow relevant to what we had for the first step. We need to review the literature and check already existing scales and try to come up with some items, generate some items based on what we have in the literature. So it should be consistent with previous empirical research and some theoretical backgrounds. There is a second method called inductive method, which is more exploratory and data-driven. So for this one, we rely on some qualitative research methods such as interviews, focus groups, and observations. And after analyzing this qualitative data, we generate and write our items. But what is the best practice? The best practice is to merge both inductive and deductive methods. Okay, so it means what we obtain from our, let's say, interviews and what we already read in the literature review, we combine them, we merge them, and we write the best items for our scale. Now, I have a question because we know that there are so many scales, there are so many questionnaires which have been developed in our field. The question is that how many of the scales in our field have followed this procedure for item generation, like based on the review of the literature or based on some inductive methods, researchers generated their items. This is something that we can think more about it. Now, how we can write effective items. So when it comes to item generation, it's not only about items like having so many items that are consistent with the literature or based on our interview data. We need to write effective items, and it is very, very important unless the reliability and the validity of our whole study might be questioned. Okay, first point. When you want to generate your initial item pool, try to include more items than what you want to include in the final scale. Let's say you aim to develop a finalized 5-item scale. It's better to include more items in the initial item pool. For example, 10 items. So there should be always more items in the initial stages. The next point, which is very important, is about the number of items. How many items should we include in a scale? So the minimum should be at least 3 items. And this is for the final scale, not the initial item pool, because we know that if we initially develop 3 items, all those 3 items or some of them might be omitted during the validation process, and in the end we have nothing. So you should always include more items for the for your item pool. And ideally, you should have something between 4 to 10 items for each scale. But there's something here that I should emphasize, and it is about the multidimensional scales. Because when you have a multidimensional scale, it means, for example, you have a scale, let's say, motivation, and you want to measure it from intrinsic and extrinsic dimensions. For sure, you need like a few items for each of these dimensions. So if a scale has more dimensions, then your finalized scale would have more items than like 3 or 4 or 10. For example, if a scale has 5 dimensions and you have like 4 items for each dimension, in the end, you will have a 20-item questionnaire. Now, about the guidelines for writing effective items, you should always use short and simple items. It's very important. According to Dornier, the length of each item shouldn't be more than 20 words. Actually, it's not a golden rule, but this is about, being concise and short. And about the structure of the sentences, you should try to use more simple structured sentences than compound and complex sentences. Because here for questioners, okay, we don't want to show, I mean, as questionnaire designers, we don't want to show our writing skills. But what is important in questionnaire development is that participants that want to answer a questionnaire, they understand the items clearly. So short, simple sentences is the best option. Another important point when it comes to questionnaire development is to avoid double-barreled items. What is a double-barreled item? An item which measures more than one thing. For example, look at this item. I worry about making grammar mistakes and not pronouncing words correctly. This item is measuring two things at the same time. So being worried about making grammatical mistakes and being worried about mispronunciation. So a person might say that, well, I am worried about mispronouncing words, but I'm not worried about grammatical mistakes. But when you have only one option, like from strongly disagree to strongly agree, you might say, I do not agree about making grammar mistakes. I'm not worried, but I'm worried about mispronunciation. So this item would be a double-barreled item and should be revised, or sometimes it's better to just change this item into two separate items. So one is about being worried about grammatical mistakes. Another item is being worried about mispronunciation. Third point, actually, for this one, there are different ideas. Some researchers emphasize that we should use both negatively worded and positively worded items. Some researchers believe that, no, we shouldn't use negatively worded items. And based on my personal experience and like what I have done with data and my personal like research projects, I would say it's better to avoid negatively worded items, or at least minimize the use of negatively worded items. There are some reasons. First of all, negatively worded items increase cognitive complexity, and it means participants need more time to read the items and understand what the items mean. Second, negatively worded items are more difficult to understand. Third, these negatively worded items can cause some reliability issues. They usually reduce reliability coefficient. And the other thing is that negatively worded items, they lead to or create incorrect factor solution. A famous example is, short grid scale from Duckworth and Queen. This scale has two components: perseverance of effort and consistency of interest. And if you have read this scale and the items, all the items for consistency of interest are negatively worded, and all items for perseverance of effort are positively worded. And some researchers have actually criticized this questionnaire because they believe that this positively and negatively worded construction of items is the reason that we have two separate factors. So it's not because of the content of the items or two different constructs, but because of the method that we have used to create these items, that we have come up with two factors. So it's important. And here is an example from this short grid scale. It says, just look at it. Setbacks don't discourage me. It's a double negative item. Don't is negative. Discourage is also another negative word. So it would be very difficult for a participant, okay, we are talking about participants, not researchers, to understand what this item means. And do not forget that many times our participants are not native English speakers. They might be, for example, at, let's say, B1 or B2 levels of English proficiency, and it might be difficult for them to like comprehend what this item is. So yeah, it's better to avoid using negatively worded items. Another important point for writing effective items is to use construct-specific response options. Now, it's very common for researchers that when they want to develop a questionnaire, they almost always use these response options, strongly disagree to strongly agree options. This is very common. You can say that, yeah, they can match with every question, with every item. Yes, we can say to some extent they match with every type of item, but if you want a more reliable and valid response from your participants, it's better to use rating scales which match with the content of your items. Now, look at this example. It says, I'm willing to speak English in the classroom, and we have strongly disagree to strongly agree options. And I changed it to this one. How willing are you to speak English in the classroom? Not at all willing to very willing. If we compare these two items, we see that the connection between the response options and the item is closer for the second revised item than the first one. And the next one, which was very interesting, actually, I haven't seen this one in many papers or books, but it was interesting to me. It says that, and that's why I have written a more cautious one. It says that it's better to use questions instead of statements for our items. And their justification is that questions are more conversational, more straightforward, and easier to process mentally, and people are more practiced at responding to them than to statements. So it's like a conversation between researcher and the participant. So an item like I am willing to speak English in the classroom should be changed to how willing are you to speak English in the classroom. I'm just saying again that this is something that I didn't find in many papers or studies, but I thought it could be something that we can consider in our future scale developments. Next point is about the rating scale. All of us are familiar with the Likert type scales. Yeah, these strongly disagree to strongly agree example. And what is the best practice? Because, you know, we can have different rating scales. For example, it can be 3 point, 4 point, 5 point, 6 point, 7 point, and other points. But what is the best practice? Many researchers believe that the best practice is to use 5 to 7 point Likert type scales. If you have scales with rating scales of fewer than 3 options, then you will probably get very low reliability coefficients. And interestingly, if you have more than 7 options, again, research has found that it does not improve reliability. So it might be mostly confusing for the participant. So try to keep your rating scales to 5 or to up to 7 point rating scale. And about the response options, the most famous one is the agreement, which is from strongly disagree to strongly agree. But there are many other response options that we can use for our research, for our scale, depending on the content of the questionnaire and the construct that we are measuring. It can also be about degree. For example, you can use not at all to very much, or about frequency from never to always, and many other options that you can use for your items. Now, so we talked about some important steps for item generation, and now I thought it's good. It would be interesting if we evaluate the effectiveness of these items. The question is that, are these items good items or not good items, bad items? And what is the problem and how can we revise them? I think we can, if you have any ideas, you can just share it in the chat box. And we can see what the problems are here. So the first one says, do you agree that learning English is fun and easy? So we can do it one by one. So what is the problem with this item? Or is it problematic at all? Any ideas? So I just look at the yeah, problematic, yes or no. And maybe you can also say, very good. This is a double-barreled item. Yes, no question should be avoided. It's about yes, no question. Okay, yeah. The main point, yes, one is about yes, no. Do you agree? So it's like, it seems like a yes, no question. I got it. And the second thing, it looks like a double-barreled item because it says learning English is fun and easy. So that could be problematic, and it's better to divide it into two items. The second one, how confident are you in your ability to speak English in a classroom setting? Do you think this is a good item or it needs revisions? Exactly. It seems like a good one. I agree. I think this one can be a good item. The third one, how often do you practice English and watch English movies? Okay. This is, yeah, very similar to the first one. Yeah, it is a double-barreled item. Third one, I do not find English learning uninteresting. Yeah, I do not find English learning uninteresting. Yeah, I don't know, it might be really someone uses this type of item, but yeah, simply said it's, yeah, terrible and double negative, exactly. And the last one, what do you think about the last one? Most students feel anxious about speaking English. There is something problematic about this item. Let me see. So most students feel anxious about speaking English. Exactly. It's not personal. Exactly. The problem is that, so, with these type of statements, like most students, most people, the thing is that with these type of items, participants usually, like most of them, would agree or disagree, which can create ceiling or floor effect. And the thing is that it's not about the participants themselves, but about other people. So it might not be the best option when you are writing items. It should be something like, I feel anxious about speaking English, not most students. Good. So let's just continue. After defining our constructs and generating the initial item pool, the next step is to check content validity. We are familiar with the concept of content validity. It means to what extent the content of a scale measures its relevant construct. Now, there are two important concepts within like when it comes to scale development, and the first one is called construct irrelevant variance, which means there might be some irrelevant, redundant items in our scale. And the second one is called construct underrepresentation, which means some important aspects of a construct are not included in a scale. Okay, in different steps of our validation process, we can check these two aspects, construct irrelevant variance and construct underrepresentation. And one of them is during the content validity process and checking. So let's see how we can do content validity. Okay. When it comes to content validity, the most famous approach is called expert evaluation or expert judgment. So there might be different names, but the name expert is always there. So we ask some experts to check the content of our items and to see if they are relevant and appropriate for our construct or not. So the first step for expert evaluation is to find some experts who have done research related to the construct that we want to develop a questionnaire for that. The next point is about the number of experts. How many experts are needed? Based on the literature, something between 5 to 20 experts have been recommended. So after finding the experts and contacting them, we should give them a content validation form. Yeah, this is something that we normally do not do in our scale development studies. So we give this content validation form to our experts and we ask them to check and rate clarity, relevance, and representativeness of the items. I'll show you a content validation form later. And then based on their responses, we use different methods to evaluate expert judgment. Most of these methods are quantitative methods. They have some like simple formulas to calculate. So there are some measures such as content validity index, content validity ratio, and coherence coefficient kappa that we can use to check the content validity of our scale. But you can also ask the experts to comment on the content of the questionnaire. So it's not only about some quantitative measures that you can use, you can also ask them to leave any comments, or if they have any ideas about the questionnaire, they can just inform you about those aspects. So this is an example of the content validity form. In this content validity form, we write each item of our scale. Let's say we have a 3-item scale that measures language anxiety. We ask this question from the experts: to what extent is each item relevant to anxiety in the language classroom? And then they should say that to what extent they think they are relevant or irrelevant from. So again, it's like a questionnaire evaluation, or evaluating the effectiveness of the items or the relevance of the items. Okay, so this is the content validity phase. Fourth step, after checking the content validity of the scale with the experts, the next step is to check the we can say the relevance and the appropriateness of the items, not from the experts' point of view, but from the participants themselves. So this step is called cognitive interviewing. What is cognitive interviewing? First of all, it is a qualitative technique, and during this cognitive interviewing, we ask participants to verbalize their mental process as they are answering the items. And a very common method here is to use think aloud method. And the whole point is that, so we want to answer this question: do participants interpret the items in the same way as the survey designers intended? So it would be something like this. As the survey designer, we ask the participants, please read this item aloud and tell me what it means to you. So this is the item. I feel anxious when my language teacher asks me a question in English. And then we ask our participant to read it and to give us a feedback that what this item means to them. And if we think that the intended meaning of the item is different from like the meaning of the item is different for participants than what we intended, then we might need to revise the item or even omit the item. So this is another step that can confirm the relevance and appropriateness of the items of our scale. Now, the fifth step is conducting pilot testing. I think this one is very common, and most researchers conduct pilot testing. So the idea is that we should share our finalized scale, actually not finalized scale, but the one that has gone through the previous 4 stages, with participants whose characteristics are very similar to the target population, to our target population. And we want to see to what extent the questionnaire works and if everything is as we wanted to or not. So for pilot testing, first of all, we need to check the sample size. It is recommended that we can have at least 30 to 100 participants for pilot testing. And we can use this for item analysis and reliability analysis. I'll talk more about these two later. And in case we want to do more, like factor analysis, we can have more than, actually, we should have more than 100 participants, because for factor analysis, it's usually, it doesn't usually work with fewer than 100 participants. So minimum is 3. And what we should do during pilot testing, I said item analysis. We should check item range, mean, and standard deviation. We should check item total correlation, which means to what extent each item in a scale is related to all other items collectively. And it is recommended that it should be above 0.30. Otherwise, that item is not related to other items and should be omitted. We can also check item distribution for possible floor and ceiling effects. What does it mean? Let's say you have an item and you look at the responses. So your responses, let's say, is from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And when you look at the item, you see that almost all or all participants selected strongly agree, or most of them selected strongly disagree. We have this floor or ceiling effect, and it means the item is not an effective item. And these items should be either revised or omitted. Okay, next thing, which is an important step in pilot testing, is to check the reliability of our scale. There are different formulas. The most famous ones are Cronbach's alpha and McDonald's omega, which should be above 0.70. And in case you have enough sample size, you can also check, actually run factor analysis and examine the factor structure of your scale. And the very last step, main administration. Here, the first step, we should check the sample size. So after you have checked everything and you are sure that your scale has worked very well, now you need to gather the data for your main phase of the study. So about sample size, which is very important, there are some rules of thumb. For example, some researchers believe that we should have between, or at least, 5 to 10 participants per item. What does it mean? Let's say you have developed a scale which has 20 items. So minimum should be, so 20 multiplied by 5, it means you should have at least 100 participants. But most researchers believe that you should have at least 10, because I think with 5, it might not always work well, but I think 10 is more famous than 5. So let's say if you have 20 items, it's better to have at least 200 participants. And there are also some general guidelines. For example, some I don't know, numbers are there that they say at least you should have 200 participants if you want to do scale development and validation. So yeah, you can consider all these things, and you can also run power analysis, but yeah, sample size is really important. So the next step is, after item analysis and reliability analysis, we should run factor analysis. Okay, factor analysis is a main step in validation of a scale, and it informs us if our scale is unidimensional, multidimensional, how different items are related to different factors. So it's a very important step in construct validation. Now, some misconceptions about factor analysis. First of all, this is very common, not only in our field, but also in other fields of study, such as education or psychology. And the problem is that many researchers use principal component analysis, or PCA, instead of exploratory factor analysis for scale development. I'll explain more later that why we shouldn't use PCA instead of EFA for scale development. One reason is that, okay, most researchers actually use SPSS for running exploratory factor analysis, or PCA. And the problem is that principal components analysis is the default function in SPSS. So as soon as you open the factor analysis and go to running a factor analysis, the default function is principal components. And in case you want to run exploratory factor analysis, you should use other methods like maximum likelihood or principal axis factoring, which are famous methods of exploratory factor analysis. Now, why is PCA, or principal component analysis, why it's not a like suitable method for scale development? The reason is that it is actually exploratory factor analysis which is suitable for identifying latent variables, and PCA is mostly used for data reduction. It is a data reduction technique. So it's not appropriate to use PCA instead of EFA for scale development. Now, another important topic in scale development is the issue of running EFA or CFA and its relevant constructs, such as exploratory structural equation modeling, bifactor models. So I just consider them as a kind of CFA aspects, which are more or less the same. But which one we should use for scale development, EFA or CFA? The best practice for a newly developed scale is to first run exploratory factor analysis and then confirmatory factor analysis and other methods such as ESEM or BSEM. So there is an issue when it comes to using both EFA and CFA, and the problem is that many researchers might use the same data set for both EFA and CFA, and it is wrong. Never ever use the same data set for running both EFA and CFA. So what is the best best strategy you can do? The best thing you can do is to, first of all, you should have a large sample size. For example, let's say you should have something around 400 participants, and then you can use half of your sample for exploratory factor analysis and another half for confirmatory factor analysis, ESEM, and BSEM analysis. So never ever use the same data set for both EFA and CFA techniques. Okay. The next point about scale development and validation is checking the convergent and discriminant validity of a questionnaire or scale. So what is convergent validity? Convergent validity means to what extent a measure or a scale correlates with other measures of the same construct. For example, we expect to find a large correlation between a newly developed anxiety scale and other anxiety scales. And how to interpret correlations? So if we find a very low correlation, let's say below 0.30, we can say that the two scales might not be measuring the same trait. And we also have another issue, and it is about very high correlation. A high correlation is okay, but not a very high correlation. If the correlation is very high, let's say above 0.85 or 0.90, we might say that the newly developed scale is a redundant scale. You might have heard this term, jangle fallacy, which means because we are using different names for our scales, we believe that we are measuring different constructs, but essentially they are measuring the same thing. And correlations can inform us about this jangle fallacy. Okay, so convergent validity, and we also have discriminant validity, which means a construct should not be related to unrelated constructs. For example, we do not expect to find a very high and large correlation between anxiety and intelligence because they are not relevant or theoretically relevant constructs. Now, you might ask how we can check convergent and discriminant validity of a questionnaire. For convergent validity, I just mentioned them because we do not have time. If I want to go into details, each of them might need, I don't know, 10 minutes to explain. I just mentioned them, but you can just check on like Google Scholar. There are many great articles that you can use to calculate these statistics. So first of all, you need a moderate to high correlation with established scales. High factor loadings in CFA, usually above 0.50, is a good sign of conversion validity. There should be an average variance extracted of above 0.50, and composite reliability should be above 0.70. And for discriminant validity, first of all, correlations with unrelated constructs should not be large. The other thing, you can check AVE that I mentioned in the previous slide, and you can also check heterotrait and monotrait ratio, which should be below 0.85. If you check all these things, you can say that your scale has convergent and discriminant validity. Okay. I think we do not have much time, so I just try to go to more important points from my talk. First of all, some points about the length of the questionnaire. This is from Dornier. Dornier believes that a questionnaire should not be more than 4 to 6 pages long, or it shouldn't take more than half an hour. And I think even half an hour might be too much for participants. This is again based on my personal experience. I think it's better to include items in your questionnaire or different variables in questionnaire so that it doesn't take more than 15 minutes. But actually it depends on your participants, like their age, and many other factors are also involved. But yeah, try to use shorter scales, and generally speaking, yeah, based on Dorney, it shouldn't take more than half an hour. Okay, I skipped this one. About rating scales, I mentioned Likert type scales, which are the most common type of close-ended items. But we also have other types of rating scales, for example, semantic differential items, or sometimes I think they also use bipolar items. So we have something like anxious to confident, instead of mentioning the exact range of, let's say, adjectives here. Another thing we can use is that we use numbers instead of the rating scale, or we can have a format like this. But what is the best format? Again, based on many researchers, a Likert type scale is the best one, and especially when the options are visible for each item. So for each item, participants should see the options they have to choose from. So this is the best way that you can formulate your Likert type scale, because it's very common, for example, like this one, you give numbers and participants might just think that, okay, what was 1? What was number 2? What was number 4? And they just have to go up and check or go to the, I don't know, first page. and it might be a bit confusing for them. So the best option would be something like they see the rating scales, their options for each single item. Okay. And I try to finish it just with the format. This is the last one, okay? For the format, there are several main parts of a questionnaire. You should have a title for your questionnaire. You should have a general introduction which describes the purpose of the study. It assures confidentiality, anonymity, and of course, Dorni emphasizes this a lot. Do not forget to thank you your write a thank you to your participants. And also you should have specific instructions for each part of your scale, because your questionnaire might have different sections. And for each section, you again need to write the specific construction. And at the end of the questionnaire, you need to include your contact names, your email addresses, or even your phone numbers if you think you can do. And in case you would like to invite volunteers for a follow-up interview, you can just ask them to write their emails. And again, at the end, do not forget to include the final thank you. Okay, unfortunately, because we do not have time, there are a few slides left, not much, but I can also share them with you in case you want to just look the other slide as well. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for sharing your expertise and insights on skill development that have, of course, provided everyone with deeper understanding of the techniques and guidelines involved in skill development or developing skills. And of course, as expected, it was very informative and engaging. And now I give the floor to the participants. So does anyone have a question for our distinguished speaker?
May I?
Can you please raise, okay. Can you please raise your hand? Okay, so we have anyone?
I think Michael, Ban
Okay,
Ban.
I can see Mike, yeah. Mike, Ban Ban, Esther, and
Okay.
Bruno.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Hassan. Thanks for the great talk. I wanted to ask about your recommendation to use either 5 or 7 item Likert scales, and your opinions on using 6 item ones. So for instance, I prefer personally the 6 item ones because they force the respondents to not take the middle option, and that will typically give you a little more diversity in the results. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Thank you, Mike, for your question. Yeah, this is a very relevant point that you mentioned. This is something in the literature about questionnaire development, that it's better to go with even number rating scales, because many participants might like to go with the middle point, and it's easier when you have an odd number of responses. When you have like a 5 or a 7 point Likert type scale, they usually go to the middle and just choose the middle one. I agree. So maybe the 6-point Likert type scale would be a better option. But you know that there are also some researchers who say that, yeah, because it makes sense to have a midpoint, because some people might say that, yeah, we are in the midpoint. So there are different ideas, but I'm with you. I personally think that a 6-point Likert type scale is better than 5 and 7.
Thanks.
Okay, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So let's go to Ben Lee and then Bruno.
Hi, thank you very much, Hassan, for this very informative presentation. I've got 2 questions, which is not about developing new instruments, but about adapting existing skills into a specific context or culture. So in these circumstances, for example, you mentioned that, yeah, when we develop, we need to develop at least 3 items so that we can keep at least 3 items in the final version. How about, so what if when we are adapting a scale into a specific context, but we found that the factor loadings of the items were not high enough, so we need to delete them. And what if we only have 2 items left? But theoretically, this is a widely verified theoretical construct and also very well accepted instruments used in other contexts. So I'm wondering how would you deal with that? So this is my first question.
Okay, so I answered this one, and then we can go to the next one. Thank you, Bandan, for your interesting question. I think this is something that might happen to us, especially when we are adapting a scale which has been validated and developed in, let's say, a Western context, and now we want to validate it in a, let's say, Eastern context. And it's very common that this happens, that some items are not working as we expected. So about 2 items, I think that was the main question, that can we keep 2 items for a scale? I would say yes, you can still keep 2 items because, 3 items is the idea of the first step of questionnaire or scale development, that we should have 3 items or even more actually. But you can still have 2 items if the factor analysis shows you that the other items are not working well. So you can still continue your analysis with 2 items, but of course you can just mention it as a limitation that, yeah, this scale maybe, for example, originally it had 5 items, but 3 items didn't work for our context. And it can be a suggestion for future research that this scale might not be the best scale for, let's say, the context of China, Japan, or like some other Eastern context. But it's not a problem if you continue your analysis with 2 items.
Sorry, I have a further question based on your response.
Okay, so yeah, of course.
If we have only 2 items with a factor, then measurement model, full SEM will not be able to be conducted, right? So we can only use composite variables to run path analysis. Okay, so
okay. So the thing is that it depends on your model. So if you want to do like a confirmatory factor model, okay, confirmatory factor analysis to check the measurement model of a model with only 2 items, it doesn't work. But if you put it in a full SEM model, so you have other variables, I think it can, not I think, I'm sure, maybe we can also ask, because we have Abdullah, who is an expert in SEM here, but I would say 100% sure that you can run a full SEM model with 2 items. Not if all your variables, latent variables, have 2 items, but if like 1 or 2 of them have 2 items, but if the rest have more than 2, it should be fine and your model works. Abdullah, would you like to comment if you are still here?
Yep. I can confirm that is. Hi everyone. Hi Badran. Hi. Just a small confirmation that yes, if you have 1 latent variable with 2 items, but and they are highly correlated, this is a condition. So if they are not highly correlated, then this specific latent variable would not work properly. Will show low reliability and validity, the convergent validity, other stuff. So there is a risk, but it could be fine if these 2 are highly correlated. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Abdullah.
Okay, so I think it's Bruno's.
Sorry, I have a second question.
Good to see you, Bruno.
Okay.
Okay, because I think we have only 5 to 10 minutes left to give.
Okay, so sure.
Left to give the chance to it. Okay, Bruno.
Thank you. Well, hello, Hassan. I have a lot of limitations with my study. First, the sample size, because the maximum number of participants that I will have will be 55, not even 60. It's a quasi-experimental study. It's an intervention, and I'm going to measure pre and post-test, and then compare the results. And I intend to, it's also a very complex model with many variables, and I intend to prove a model by using PLS sim. Now, the point is, the content validation was done very thoroughly. I applied with many previous groups before. I followed all the guidelines that you mentioned. But then in the final pilot study, I ran statistical analysis, and I found some problems with Cronbach's alpha with some items, which I attribute mostly to negative wording of these items. Now, I'm using them with the control group. The teacher is giving the classes, and I have already given the questionnaires in the beginning and in the end of the group. In the meantime, I have decided to make the model less complex after hearing my argument in my qualification exam. So I'm going to delete some of the items of my questionnaire, make them shorter. The thing is, most scales have only 3 items. Is it worth it maybe having a different control group after this stage, dropping this control group and starting all over? Or can I continue with only 3 items per scale? Then I will, drop some of the variables, some of the scales I have decided to drop because it was too complex, the model. So is it worth it? Keeping only 3 items? Should I include more items and make the process even longer? What's your idea about this and the sample size too, if you may?
Okay. Thank you, Bruno, for your question. So I think one important thing, especially with your research, which is a kind of experimental research, is that first of all, with experimental research, we usually have this problem with the sample size, because it's not like a questionnaire study that we can gather, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of participants, and it's very common to have less than 100 participants. So it's very common, and I think even in this type of research, it might be more important, experimental research, that we choose our scales more carefully, because actually we cannot do a factor analysis with less than 100 participants, and we should be sure that the scales work really well with our participants. So one thing that you can do before running your analysis, or even the number of choosing the number of participants, is to run a power analysis. A power analysis can give you more details about how many participants you can have if you want to achieve a certain effect size. So power analysis is one strategy, first of all. And the second, about having 3 items per scale, I would say it is enough in case those scales are well-known scales. They have been used in previous research, and the reliability and the validity of the scale has been confirmed, supported. I would say it's not a problem if you still continue with 3 items. But if it's possible, I mean, if you can do it, I would suggest adding more items to your scales, if possible.
Thank you.
But no one can say that this is problematic. You're welcome. I hope everything goes well with your research.
Okay. Esther?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. So my question is it acceptable to have both from strong to from disagree, from agreeing, and also never to always items within one scale?
Okay, very good question. So generally speaking, it's better not to mix different rating scales within one scale, but I have seen some well-known scales that researchers do this. I don't know if you are familiar with PERMA profiler that actually measures well-being. It's a very famous scale. And all the actually researchers have used such a thing that one item is strongly agree to a strongly disagree, strongly agree. Another one is I don't know, never to always. But generally speaking, I would say it's better to use more consistent rating scale, at least for each scale. So let's say you might have 5 different scales in your questionnaire: anxiety, willingness to communicate, motivation. It's better to use a consistent rating scale for each scale. So for motivation, it's better to use, let's say, agreement rating scale. For anxiety, you can use, for example, degree. So it's better to be consistent. It's mostly because it might be a bit confusing for participants when they see different rating scales within one scale. So it's the best practice is to just a consistent rating scale.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you again. Alfaf, is your turn.
Hi, thank you very much for this interesting presentation.
You're welcome.
I have a question regarding the reliability and the validity of a construct. Now, there are 2 questions actually that are linked to each other. So the first question is, do you think that over time, participants may reconstruct their understanding of specific emotion, let's say for enjoyment, due to maybe increased experience or awareness, or maybe more exposure to classroom activities, let's say? And if so, how can skill developers account for this conceptual evolution, so that the construct measured at time 1 is not different from the construct that is measured at time 2 or 3, assuming that the construct is stable but everything else change, can also be maybe problematic.
Okay.
So that's the question.
Okay, very good question, and I have I think a good answer for this question, because this question is very important. It's about we can say consistency of the meaning of the items over time, considering all changes that might happen to the participants regarding their emotional experiences, especially with factors such as motivation and emotion. It's very common that during, let's say, a semester, their anxiety or I don't know, enjoyment goes up and down, and it changes over the semester. So what should we do? So your question, I assume, is related to a kind of longitudinal research. Yes, because if it is a cross-sectional research, it's not a problem. We just gather data from one point, we calculate reliability and validity, and it's done. But what about for a longitudinal research? So actually, what you said is very important, and it is the first step in assuring the construct validity of our scales in a longitudinal research, and it is called measurement invariance testing over time. And what does it mean? It means if our scales function in the same way in over time, let's say in 4 different points of time that we have gathered our data, and if you can establish measurement invariance over time, then you are sure that, yes, the meaning of the items didn't change over the semester for your participants. And at the same time, you can also calculate reliability for each time point. And then you can say that, yeah, so you have reliability and you have the construct validity for all the scales in your questionnaire. So I think you can usually see this in longitudinal research. Most researchers, I would say, actually, you have to do it. They should establish measurement invariance before answering their research questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Because yeah, I had that issue when I was PhD.
Okay.
Yeah, so
yeah, I have recently published a paper about it's called Exploring and Addressing Concerns about Greed, which was published in Learning and Individual Differences. If you read this article, actually, I have just calculated and reported this measurement invariance testing over time. But actually, you can also find many other articles that have addressed this topic in more detail. So yeah, it is a prerequisite for conducting longitudinal research.
Thank you very much for your answer.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. And I think we should give the chance to Ben to ask another last question.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah, my other question was related to my previous one about adaptation of established scales into a specific context. So you've mentioned reporting the convergent and divergent validity for the newly developed measurement. So I was wondering, for these adapted scales, well, I believe it is better to report AVE and HTMT that you have just recommended.
Yeah.
But we also commonly meet a problem that is a very strict word limit from certain journals. So, and also about the process of reporting dropping items and reporting CFA, etc. So, which takes a lot of words. So I think sometimes it's hard to strike the balance. So I'm facing these problems right now. So I would like to ask for your suggestions and how should I address reviewers' comments or to balance between and also
I think Okay. So first of all, I think you are not alone, Ban. I think many of us are facing this issue of word limits that we want to, especially when it comes to statistical analysis, and when you are using more advanced analysis and you want to report so many things, and you see that, it would be too much for a paper. And I also face this issue. I have faced it a few times, but the most severe one was a paper that I published about development of a PRIDE scale among language learners. And I submitted, I think 2 years or 3 years ago, to Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching. And the thing was that I had to remove the whole thing about the validation process, like the part which was about, not the validation, actually, talking about the factor structure, because I tested different models, bi-factor model, I don't know, one-factor model, hierarchical model, and with all the relevant statistics. So what I did, my recommendation is that you can do two things. Most journals have this option that you can have supplementary, like online supplementary materials, and it is not counted as part of the main document. So if the word limit is, let's say, 6,000 words, for the online supplementary material, there is usually no word count limit. So you can just refer the readers and reviewers to that online supplementary material in case they want to know more about the details of your analysis. Another strategy is that I think almost all journals have this option, but in case they do not have this option, like online supplementary material, my recommendation is to use this data archiving or repositories such as the Open Science Framework, OSF, that you can just upload, for example, your data, you can upload your, additional analysis that you have conducted there, and just refer the reviewers or the readers to that part. But I know that sometimes we want to tell more, but the space does not allow us.
Yeah. May I ask one more?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So for the problem that you have just mentioned on the publication for your PRIDE measurement publication. So, but for my study, for example, my focus is actually on the relationship between the different constructs. I was borrowing this construct into this specific context, and I'm trying to investigate the relationship between, or the mechanism between, these variables. So the instrument is only not the focus of my study. I'm not developing or validating the scale. So yeah, that's so, which means that I have a lot of other contents as the focus of this study. Yeah. So in this case, for the validity reporting of one of the questionnaire. So that's that. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
I got your point. So I know that sometimes our focus for a study is like scale development and validation.
Yeah.
So it's usually expected to provide more details about the validation process. But when your focus is not on the validation and development of a scale, and mostly you want to just, I don't know, test the relationship between variables, I think it makes a lot of sense that you skip many of those things related to scale development. So you don't need to report all the details for scale about the measures that you need to take for scale development and scale validation. Maybe just checking the reliability and the factor structure of the scale would be enough.
Okay. Great.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for the informative session. And before we call it a day, I'd like to one more time highlight the incredible job done by the research method SIG team, Giuseppe, Bianca, Alfev, behind the scene, of course. And I want also to mention that we will also have Paradowski on November 20th, who will talk about what can network analysis reveal about the complexity of language learning and psychology. Dr. Hassan, again, thank you for accepting our invitation, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Just I want to say something because I could see there are some questions on the chat box, and because I know that we have to finish it right now. I would say if anyone has any questions, because I know there are questions there, please feel free to contact me. I know that I shared my screen and my email, and I actually you can also find my email very easily on the internet. So please, if you have any questions, please contact me, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And thank you very much, Mackie,
I also
for organizing.
Thank you
so much. And I also want to mention again that all the recordings will be posted on our YouTube channel. You will find the link in the comment section. And if you have also any question, there is the email of the SIG on all the posters that are posted. And see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hassan.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maki.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.